Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Now today is a really exciting day because I have a real-time tutorial for you guys. Now this coincides with the release of my absolute favorite Disney movie, which is The Lion King. The new live action Lion King is released today, and I thought that it would be perfect if I released my first part of my recent lion piece, my male lion piece, as a real-time tutorial for you YouTube subscribers. Working on big cats and things like this are always so inspiring to me, and I really wanted to work on a male lion because of the upcoming release of The Lion King, and I really want to share that with you guys. So I really hope that you enjoy this first part of the real-time tutorial. I've made a blog post on my website where you can find the line art, the reference photo and the materials list. The reference photo for this piece was taken from Pixabay. I'll also leave the link for that if you want to go to it directly. I've also included a black and white version of this photo which you can use for tonal qualities and that kind of thing. The blog post for that will be listed in the description for you guys if you want to check it out. I would love to see some of your recreations of this guy, so make sure that you tag me on Instagram and join my Facebook group as well and post your works in progress and get some feedback from some of the lovely members over there. I'll leave the links to both in the description, and if you use the hashtag AmieHowardArt on Instagram and tag me in it, then I will doubly see it. So are you excited to start this guy? I'm really excited for you to start this journey on this male lion piece, so let's go. Hi guys, welcome to this tutorial where we will be drawing a lion, a male lion. So if you have followed previous tutorials, you'd have seen that we've drawn a lion cub before, and I've had many requests to draw an actual male lion. So this is what we're going to be working on today. The outline I've provided for you is from a reference photo taken from Pixabay. I tried to source my own reference photo for this, but I couldn't find one in a pose that I liked. And yeah, so I just looked on Pixabay, just did a search for lion, and this one came up. So if you want to go and have a look on Pixabay for your own lion reference, if you don't want to use this one, feel free to do that. The line art I've provided for you is the one which I've drawn and scanned, and the colour list is all from the Polychromos range. There's quite a few colours in here. If you've looked at the materials list, you'll notice that there's quite a few different colours. These are mainly the red and the brown colours because there's lots of different kind of highlighted effects going on within the lion's mane. I'm working on the Fabriano Artistico. This is the hot pressed watercolour paper, 140 pound weight, and the size of this drawing is roughly 10 by 10 inches, so it's a square piece this time. I've got my kneaded eraser here, which I'm going to be using to just lighten up some of the graphite lines, but we're going to dive straight in and we're going to be adding in the lion's eyes. So what we're going to be doing is adding in the face, and then we're going to be going and moving on to all of the mane, because the mane is probably going to be one of the hardest parts. So to begin the eyes, I'm just going to lightly lift the graphite here, just really lightly. I'm going to take some of the dark sepia, and I'm going to make sure that all of my pencils have a nice sharp point. You can see this one is not quite as sharp as I'd have liked, so I'm just going to give it a quick sharpen so we've got a really nice fine point to work with. Okay, so what we're going to do is just gently outline where we have the darker areas on the lion's eyes. We're going to work on both eyes at the same time for this. So you're just going to really lightly go in with your dark sepia. Just really gently outline the shape of all of that dark area around the iris. So these are really tiny eyes. if you want to draw your lion to a larger scale, feel free to absolutely do so. I've drawn mine slightly smaller scale. So I'm going to add in both sides. So I'm just getting slightly darker on this left hand side first. We're also just going to add in the tiny little area of the pupil as well, just again by lightly using the point of the pencil, just really lightly shading that in. I'm going to come across to the right hand eye and do exactly the same. So we're just going to outline the iris, outline all of those darker areas. So just really lightly at first. So we're just going to get a little heavier with the darkening of these dark areas. So just really increase the strength of the dark rings around the eyes. So we want the pupil in this one as well. Okay, so with the darker areas down, we can then go in and work on the iris colour. So for this I'm just going to put down a base of some warm grey 1 within the eyes. So just layering down some warm grey 1, and I'm using shading motion, just going back and forth. Going to leave a little area at the top where we have the highlight. So we don't want to fill all of this with the warm grey 1. Just want to go around the highlight area. The same with the right hand one as well. So I'm just going to go in with some of our lighter tones. So we're going to start off with the dark Naples ochre. I'm going to do exactly the same thing. Just go in with a really light hand and lightly shade over that base of the warm grey one. So you get a really nice sort of yellow glow. I'm going to get slightly darker. I'm not going to go in with like really dark oranges. I'm going to go in with some raw umber. Now this is what we're going to use for the shadows, and we're going to add the shadows around the pupil and around the edges of the eyes. We're going to use exactly the same method, just using a light shading motion, light pressure on the pencil, and I'm just using a circular motion for this. So making really tiny little circles. It's coming above the highlight as well with this colour. And the same on the right hand side here as well, just going around the pupil and darkening up, just making really tiny light-handed circular motions. And then around the edges. I'm going to add a tiny little bit of some terracotta into the eyes, just around the edges, just give it a bit more of like an orange glow in there. Now I'm also going to take a white pencil. I'm using a Prismacolor white. I'm just going to use this in a circular motion with a light hand and just blend all of these colours together within the iris so far. I'm just going over again with some more raw umber. Darkening up around the pupil and around the edges. I'm going to take some of the walnut brown. I'm going to start to really darken up above these areas of the highlight up here. And just coming around and around the edges of the eyes, just adding on that little bit of cast shadow, just giving them a little bit more of a three-dimensional look. Same on the left hand side. I'm just going to come back to the dark sepia and we're going to go into the pupils just darken those up a little bit more. Just using really tiny points on the pencil just to darken them up. And then into the highlight we're going to bring in some of the sky blue. So just need to give this a little bit of a sharpen. I'm just going to come into the highlight and just add really tiny little circular motions of the sky blue into the highlighted area. Now it does become a lot trickier to add details and everything within eyes when you're working on a small scale like this. So you just need to make sure your pencils are nice and sharp, make sure you've got some really precise little markings that you're making within the eyes. So I'm just taking some burnt sienna and I'm just bringing that into the upper section above the highlight on the eye, and I'm also going to bring this into and around the pupil, blend it out into the lighter areas of the eye, and I'm also going to use this just very lightly at the edges of the eye as well. I'm just making like tiny little lines just to give the impression there's a little bit of texture going on there, and I just need to enlarge this darker ring here at the same time. And we really need to make this really nice and dark around this highlight so the highlight kind of pops out a little bit. So I'm going to use a mixture of the burnt sienna and the walnut brown. I'm just going to give the walnut brown a quick sharpen up as well. So really nice and dark around this highlight. And just around the top of the eye in general. And on to the left hand side we're going to do the same. We're going to bring in some burnt sienna. Then use some of the walnut brown and really darken up against that highlight. Just going to go in with a darker line along the top with some dark sepia. We've got some nice looking eyes developing here, so I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. And you've got really nice, what you want to achieve is the light colour through the centre, you've got a little bit of shading above and below, and then that's absolutely perfect. I'm actually going to add a tiny little touch of the chromium green opaque, just going to really lightly glaze this into the lighter section. Just really gently in there. Okay, so those are the eyes in. As I said, just really tiny little eyes They don't require very much going on in there because they're so small you can't really see very many details, but if you're drawing larger then you can go ahead and add some more details in there. But we're going to go ahead and move on to the fur. So we're going to add in all of this fur around the eyes now. So we're going to start on the left and we're going to work our way across. We're just going to do the top part along the eyes and then we'll do the nose and the mouth. It shouldn't take us too long to actually do the face fur because it's going to be mainly just shading with a few elements of details here and there. Now one thing I will mention is that I would like to use an ivory pencil. I haven't put it on the colour list because I couldn't find my Polychromos ivory, but I think I'll add it as an additional pencil. But I can't find mine, so I'm actually going to go ahead and use another pencil. I'm going to go ahead and use a Pablo pencil. So this is a similar sort of colour. I'm just going to use cream, which is kind of like the Polychromos ivory. So if you have an ivory pencil, go ahead and use that, but I couldn't find mine in my drawers of pencils. I think I may have actually run out and forgotten to order one. But I'm just going to use this. I'm just going to add this down. I'm going to follow the direction of the fur. Now if you have graphite showing through, you want to make sure that you lift it a little bit. You don't want any of this graphite showing through on this really light coloured fur. Also we're going to take an embossing tool and we're going to add in the eyebrows. So you can see these areas here are the eyebrows. So I'm just going to lift the graphite there. I'm going to use the smallest size of embossing tool that I have, and all I'm going to do is just push really hard into the paper, indent these little eyebrow hairs here like so. And I'm going to do exactly the same on the right hand side as well. Just lift the graphite, indent the paper like so. So just 3 small hairs on either side, and then we're just going to take the ivory, or in my case the cream, and we're just going to lightly shade in the direction that the fur is going. So we're going to work above the eye first. We're just going to add in all of the base layer shading for all of this area. So you want to pay attention to the direction that the fur is going. So above the eye, obviously it goes up and around, so you're coming up and towards the left, and on the bottom it comes down and towards the left. So you just want to lightly shade back and forth. You just want to get in a nice base layer. It's going to go below the eye now as well. You want to be careful not to work too closely to the black outer edge. If you work too closely and shade quite roughly and like all the way through this area, you're going to end up with some black smudges. So just be careful when you are shading next to those darker areas that you don't drag any of that colour through. So you just want to pay attention to the fur direction. Quite a highly detailed image, so it's pretty easy to tell the fur direction here. Once we've gone below the eye there, we're just going to come across and start to fill in the nose. So the fur sort of comes up on the bridge of the nose and up towards the forehead. And at a slight angle towards the left as well. So we're going to fill in the area around the left hand or the right hand eye now. So this way, above the eye, the fur comes up and to the right, and on the bottom it comes down and to the right, so a slight diagonal. So again, just make sure you pay attention to the fur direction. If there's any sort of sudden fur changes, just make sure that you follow them. Just lightly shading, light pressure on your pencil. Coming right towards the edge of the lion's face. And below the eye as well. So then coming towards the centre of the nose. Okay, just going to come and do the underneath the eye, just come down a little bit further. Like so. Okay, so now we can just start to add in all of our mid-tones, and then it's gradually getting darker. So the fur here is not too yellow. We don't really get much of like a yellow tone to this fur until we get down to the muzzle down here. So we're going to take some of the raw umber, we're going to give it a nice sharpen. We're also going to sharpen up some of our nougat. And we also want to sharpen up some of the burnt ochre as well. So first of all, we want to take the raw umber, and we're just going to start to add in some of the darker, more sort of yellowy orangey tones. So to begin with, you just want to kind of shade. So you just want to make sure that you don't shade where we have any of the lighter areas. So pay real close attention to where you have slightly lighter areas within the lion here. And at the same time, we're also going to just bring down this little tear duct area and just darken this slightly. So we're just going around the areas of the eye to begin with and just adding in some of the raw umber. So we're just shading. So add in any sort of markings that you can see. Just really lightly shading. You don't want to put too much pigment down. So just really lightly shading, just developing into a little bit more of like a line stroke as well. And just really gently adding down any sort of areas that you can see that are slightly orange. So we just have defined a few of the areas above the eye, as you can see. Just want to really lightly shade, just following the direction of that base layer as well. So you should be able to see some sort of shading developing. Then we're going to switch to using some nougat, so getting it darker. So now we want to just follow some of the really sort of darker areas with this. So just gradually getting darker on some of these areas that we've previously added. So now we can start to work in some really tiny little fur lines. So you don't want to go too crazy with the fur lines and too long, because the fur is quite close and short on the face. And if you're working as small as I am, then you don't want to go too large with your fur lines at all, otherwise it's going to look too fluffy and hairy on the face. So you still want to keep it as close to shading as possible. I'm going to work in some of the walnut brown and just get even darker. And then we're just going to add in some dark details around underneath the eye, so where we have this really sort of light patch, light creamy patch directly underneath the eye, we're just going to start to build in a little bit of a light texture in there, just really lightly with some of the walnut brown. Slowly building in some of the darker areas within the line as well, just starting to add a little bit of texture through some of the lighter sections above the eye, just using a really sort of delicate kind of fur stroke. As I said, you don't want to keep your fur lines too long, otherwise the face is going to look too furry in comparison to when we add the mane. So I'm just going to get the nougat down on this bottom section where it's a lot darker, and I'm just going to really lightly sort of glaze and shade this colour over down here. This is also in quite a bit of shadow, so it's quite cool in tone, so we're going to add a little tiny bit of the sky blue down here as well. So just using the sky blue to create a little bit of shadow, a little bit of difference in tone. I'm also just going to add some of the sky blue directly underneath the eye. A slight bit of shadow there as well. Then we're just going to switch back to the walnut brown and just start to add in a few really tiny hairs of details. I'm just going to keep the fur lines quite far apart because we want to try and create this kind of like almost flecked look of the fur, and you can see the lighter section showing underneath, so we want to try and replicate that as much as possible. So we're going to keep the fur lines that we're using quite far apart. I'm just going to also strengthen some of the yellow tones just by going in with a little bit more of the raw umber. Just shading that down where we need a little bit more of a yellow strength. Going back in with the walnut brown and just continuing to darken. So just going over several areas 2 or 3 times just to really darken them up. So just going above the eye and just adding in a bit more raw umber. I'm going to add a tiny little bit of the burnt ochre as well because we've got a little bit more of an orange tone going on up here. So just shading a bit of burnt ochre. I'm just going to use the burnt ochre to come into this light section underneath the eye and just shade it really gently. Just give it a little bit of a yellow tone. And I'm also just going to use a little bit of the burnt sienna. And I'm going to come in finally with a bit of the dark sepia to really just add a little bit of a darker tone to this bottom section underneath the eye here. Just coming into above the eye and just fanning out some of this dark section just to blend it through to the rest of the fur. So now we're just going to do exactly the same on the right hand eye here, so just going to go around the eye, and then we're going to bring the two together. So these are some of the more harder parts that we're adding in around the eyes here, so it's good that we're getting them sort of out of the way first. So we're going to use the raw umber first of all, again just shading and using a really light pressure just to add in some of the sort of orangey yellowy areas. This side's a little bit more orange because this is where the sun is sort of catching, but the yellow gives the orange a nice base. So just really gently shading on this side. Just going over a secondary time just to darken up certain areas. Then we're going to come in with some of the burnt ochre and really sort of add in the orange aspects of some of these areas. These little markings on the above the eye and the eyebrows. I apologise for the fly if you can hear it on the microphone. It's another hot day here whilst I'm recording, and all of the insects just come in the house. So I'm just adding down this burnt ochre just into some of the darker areas where we have the sort of yellowy raw umber down. Then we're going to move into some of the nougat, so we're going to get darker on some of these areas. So just look at where your darker sections are. Look at any dark markings and sort of add them down using some shading and blend them through with some really tiny little fur strokes. And if you want to, you can increase the pressure just to get a bit of a darker tone. I'm going to use a tiny little bit of burnt sienna in some of these orange sections in the eyebrow here. And we're just coming in with some more of the nougat. So just continuing to use the nougat just to add in some shading into some of the lighter areas, just to add a little bit of texture in there. So I'm just shading some of the nougat down in the direction that the fur is going in. And I'm going to switch to using some of the walnut brown just to add in some of the real sort of darker areas and a few details. Again, just going to switch to using a little bit of the burnt sienna to use just above the eye and blending it with some of the walnut brown just so we get a little bit of texture going on above the eye there. So I'm going to also on this side introduce a little bit of the sky blue for a little bit of shading. So mainly just around the bottom of the tear duct area, and then just directly underneath this dark section that surrounds the actual eye as well. I'm going to switch to using a little bit of the dark sepia because we need to just bring this tear duct area down. So I'm just going to add in some slight texture and some shading for this. I'm also going to use a tiny little bit of the red violet on here along the tear duct, and I'm going to use some of the sky blue as well on this section around the eye, and I'm going to mix that with some of the red violet as well so we get a sort of purpley tone going on there. And then just going to go over with some of the dark sepia, add in a lot more of sort of a darker shadow on this section, and using some of the burnt sienna just to bring some shading into that, and using the raw umber as well just to tone this sort of inner section just there. I'm going to use the raw umber just lightly glaze down some colour around the eye here and into this lighter section just directly underneath the eye as well. So I'm also just going to use the dark sepia just to add in some texture and some darker lines. Like so. Okay. So now we just need to add in some more shading, bring the tones of the face to the very outer edge here and then meet up the middle. So we're going to use some of the raw umber and we're just going to really lightly shade this down. So I want to use an incredibly light hand. We're just following the direction of the fur as well. Come into the middle and then the middle there we're going to mix that with a little bit of the light flesh. And same on this side, we're just going to meet these two bits in the middle first. So just really lightly shading in on a very pale yellow. And then adding some of the light flesh on top to blend it together. Then we're going to go straight in with the nougat and we're just going to start to darken. So really lightly just shading with your nougat to begin with. I'm just going to start to get darker down the very centre now, just by adding in some slightly heavier pressured fur lines. Just blending out these darker sections as well. Going to go in with some of the walnut brown. Just starting to add some of the darker strokes in. Okay, so we're just going to bring some of the shading up towards the top of the forehead now, so just going to shading this whole area really lightly with the raw umber. Got a nice even yellow tone across there. Then we're just going to go straight in with some of the nougat, and we're just going to start to darken up all of the areas that need darkening. So straight at the top here, we're just going to work our way down. I'm actually going to go in there with a tiny little bit of the burnt ochre, and I'm going to get a little bit of a stronger tone in there with some of the raw umber as well. Just a little bit of a stronger tone. Just going in with the nougat. So I'm just going to shade on this left hand side first, just coming up. And this bit, as we come up to the top here, gets a little bit longer, so we can just lengthen our first strokes a little bit more. So I'm just going to shade up from the middle here, just to meet this bit. Just coming down the side here, just adding in all of the shading, just following any sort of darker shading you can see on the reference. So just increasing the pressure and increasing the layers where we do have some darker areas. I'm just going to get darker with some of the orange on the eyebrows here as well. And building in some of those orange tones into some of these darker areas on the forehead here as well. So just getting darker through the centre of the head. And then as we get darker elsewhere, we need to darken up some of these original areas as well. So just adding some really gentle shading, some really fine fur lines. I'm going to use some more of the raw umber. To really darken up around the very outer edges before we go in with some of our walnut brown. I'm going to go in with some of our walnut brown now. I'll start to elongate some of the strokes through the top of the head where it sort of comes out into the mane. I'm going to add some of the burnt sienna through here as well. I'm going to add some elements of dark sepia through here as well, just to really get nice and dark. I'm just lightly shading just to add that sort of shadow texture, and I'm also just going to lightly shade around the edges as well, following the fur direction, just so we get like a bit of like a darker shadow cast around here. Also just going to go through with some of the burnt ochre. I'm just going through and just adding some more shading, just adding in all of the different sort of markings we can see on the lion's face, darkening up areas. This is just a constant readjustment of darkening everything up. So just going through this top section again with some of the raw umber. Just pushing a little bit harder on the pencils around the edges of the face, so we get that nice shadow. I'm going to go through with some of the sky blue, just really sort of accentuate some of the blue areas. So underneath the eyes, and we're going to add a little bit of blue tone through the top of the head as well, just to increase that sort of shadow. And it just helps to tie in that blue underneath the eye into the rest of the lion as well. Just using some of the terracotta just to accentuate some of these orange parts, make them really nice and orangey. Like so. And just taking the walnut brown once more. Just adding some really dark parts into the fur on the top here, and then going in with some of the dark sepia. Like so. Okay, so that's the top half of the face completed there. Now we just need to swing around and do the bottom. So we're just going to come and do the whole of the bottom face, so the nose. We're going to add the nose in first and all of the darker areas like we did with the eyes, and then we'll go ahead and do the fur. For the lower half, we're just going to fill in the nose and everything first. It's pretty much the same way as we did the eye. So I'm just going to erase the graphite just a little bit with my kneaded eraser. And then because the nose is quite dark, we're just going to go straight in with the dark sepia. Just going to gently outline all of the very outer edges of the nose. Just going around and just mapping in all of the shape. Then all I'm going to do is just gently shade in where we do have the really dark areas and leave the slightly pinker areas just free of any colour for now. So just going down the middle and just increasing the pressure just to really darken up this central nose line. And the bottom of the nose there as well. Off to the side, just again gently shading in. And on the sides. Just getting a little bit darker on the edges here. So just increasing the pressure a little bit, making this area really nice and dark, and just lifting the pressure as we blend into where we have the lighter areas. So then we're going to start to just add in some of the red tones of the nose. Let's just brought this shading up a little bit more. So you can see the form of the nose. So you've got nice shading either side. Then you've got the central area which is a lot lighter in tone. So to add in that central section, we're going to just add in a quick base of the light flesh. We're just using a circular motion, just gentle shading, light pressure, going into the darker areas, just so we get a nice blend. It also just smooths out those darker areas as well, and adds this kind of pinky tone, which we're going to be adding to the middle, which is perfect. Then we're going to take some of our Venetian red. And again, just shading some of that down, just using a back and forth and circular motion just to get everything looking really nice and smooth. Going in a few different directions, so working layer by layer, just going in different directions so we get a nice even smooth surface. And again, working into those darker areas so we get that nice transition from the darker shadowy pinky tones to this lighter pink tone here. Now we're just going to take some more of the dark sepia, really darken up and really blend into this pink area now. And I'm actually going to shade a lot of this with the dark sepia so it becomes really dark. So it's just a very subtle hint of a little pink nose. It's getting a lot darker on the edges, defining a few of the nostrils and things. So as the sort of detail isn't too clear in this reference image on where the nostril placement is, I'm just using my knowledge on cat noses and how they tend to look. Now if you're having trouble when you want to add a little bit more detail, like some of the nostrils in, just have a look, Google some images of lion noses, or use some other reference photos of a clear lion nose, and then just add in your details. So on top of this I'm going to add a tiny little bit of crimson, just coming off the edges here, to a slight purple note, and I'm going to layer that with some of the sky blue as well. So we get a little bit of a purpley blue tone at the edges, and I'm also just going to add some of the really tiny little fine little details, just some little spots and speckles, just markings on the actual nose as well. Just give it a little bit of detail in there. And then just going over once more, this time I'm going to use some of the Indian red, just to really darken that pink tone up, like so. So that's our nose pretty much in there, so then we can just go ahead and add some area to the mouth here. So you've got this dark area of the mouth, so I'm not going to bother erasing any of the graphite down here because it's quite dark on this section, but I am going to take my embossing tool and just add some really tiny little white hairs. Just going to lift the graphite a little bit on here as well. So just adding in these whiskers using the embossing tool. If you don't have an embossing tool, you can use a sharp white pencil or anything that's going to kind of indent the paper. We're just going to add in some really fine little whisker details down here. So just some quick little lines just coming off the edges of the mouth before we add in this dark area. So I'm just using the smallest size of my embossing tool to begin with. And then I'm just going to switch to using the larger end to get some of these thicker whiskers in. Just really overlapping some of these as well, so we get like a nice tangled mess of the whiskers. Like so. Okay, so now that the whiskers are in, I'm just going to go in again with the dark sepia. I'm just going to line gently the outer edge of the mouth so it comes kind of like almost all the way down and round. And the same on this side as well. And I'm just going to gently shade in some of this really dark section just where the upper and the lower jaw meet. just shading in a bit and just making some fur lines just to help with the blend eventually when we go into doing all of the fluff on the chin. So you should have something that looks kind of like this. You've got a nose and a mouth defined. So now the main features are all blocked in, we can go ahead and start to add the fur. So we're going to start off just by going above the nose and this side of the sort of cheek area. So we're just going above the nose, following the fur direction. I'm just going to come down from this bit first, just gently shading using the cream from the Polychromos or a really pale yellow. I'm using cream from the Pablo range. So just coming into this bit around the mouth, adding in this base layer. Be careful when you're going next to your dark area once again that you don't drag too much of that dark pigment into the lighter area, because this section, especially around the nose, is quite light. So just following the direction on the nose as well, it's mainly just coming up. So once you've got those sections in, then I'm just going to start to add down some raw umber where we have some of the darker areas. So similar to what we did on the face up here, exactly the same. We're just going to shade in the fur direction where we have those darker sections with the raw umber, and we have a bit more of like a yellowy tint to the fur as well. So you just want to use a really light hand at first. So just going into the darker sections. Just shading in the direction that the fur is going in. And just coming down to the cheek sections and just adding in a really nice sort of faint golden tone with the raw umber. And just sort of blending it out where we have the sort of whiter section as well. So you should be able to see your embossed lines start to peek through at this point as well. So you've got some nice defined whiskers. So I'm just going to go over lightly pretty much all of the nose area, just really lightly with this raw umber, just to give it a nice golden cast. Nice golden tone pretty much all over. Then we can start to build in some of our nougat and our darker tones. So you can see it starts to look very rough at this stage. Very sort of disjointed, but as you start to add in more layers, everything will start to come together a lot more. So as you continue to darken, just continuing to darken a little bit with the raw umber. I'm going to take some of the nougat now, and we're just going to again just darken with this. Just going over the really dark sections first. And then what we're going to do is go over those sections again with some of the walnut brown, so they're really, really nice and dark, before we go in with some of the shading on the nougat. Okay, so now all of the sort of darker markings are in there. We can start to add in some different tones with the nougat. So I'm just going to shade this down in between some of these areas that we've just darkened with the walnut brown. So coming down the side of the face, adding in that sort of dark shadow down there. And on the nose, we're going to couple the nougat with some of the burnt sienna, because there's a lot of like a warm brown tone. So we're just going to shade down some burnt sienna along with the nougat where we have those warmer looking tones. I'm also just going to shade down some more of the raw umber as well. So we want some really nice warm yellow, nice orangey brown tones coming through here. Just adding in a few fur strokes as well. Going in with some walnut brown every now and then as well, and just enhancing some of the shadows. So we're just working our way over the nose, just getting darker where necessary. I'm also just going to go in and use a tiny little bit of the dark sepia. Going to do some shading with the sky blue as well. Just helps to blend everything together at the same time as well. So there's one main area where we do need to add the sky blue, and that is directly above the nose here. So just going to add in some shading lightly, just using a light pressure, just coming straight from the top of the nose and bringing the blue tone sort of up. And we're just going to take some of the dark sepia. I'm just going to blend this through with the sky blue, just making really tiny little lines just to darken this up and just to add a little bit of texture as well. And just going through with the nougat now as well. So pretty much just adding the nougat all over, just shading. Then we can just get darker, build the shadows with a couple more layers. A little bit of a firmer pressure as well, just to increase the tone. And then where we need to blend it out, we'll just lift the pressure off the pencil into the lighter areas. So we also need to be wary of where there is patches of light. So we've got a large patch of light here. So to increase that sort of sensation and atmosphere of the light, I'm just going to go in with some of the dark Naples ochre and shade some of this down in the direction that the fur is going in, just so it brings like a bit of a brighter yellow to give that sort of yellow reflection. And then we're just going to shade lightly some of the nougat down into it and just to add a tiny little bit of texture. So we're going to create that sort of look of light just by adding the shading around it. Now this section just next to it here is a lot more of like an orange tone, so I'm just going to go in here with some of the burnt sienna and add this down. And we're also just going to add in some of this dark chrome yellow, which is a really bright yellow, into that, just to make it really kind of luminous. So we want to try and make it look as if this little section here is glowing. We've just got the sun hitting the fur and it's just got this really lovely rich orange colour. And we want to blend it into the other areas of fur as well. And we're just going to switch back to the burnt sienna and we're just going to continue to darken some of this. I'm going to switch to some of the walnut brown as well. And just start to really darken up this central section here, lightly blending it into this lighter patch. Just using the burnt sienna as well, just to bring this sort of line that comes around the eyes, just going to blend that into this lighter area just by gently lifting the pressure off of the burnt sienna pencil as we come down and around. So just going to work on darkening some of these points around the eyes, and especially on this side of the face. And then we just need to add some shading down of some nougat into this bit of the nose, just give it a sort of more of a grey tint, and get slightly darker on the left hand side where the face is in a bit more shadow. Gradually lift the pressure as we work towards the right to create that really soft, subtle blend. Also just going to work in a little bit of the walnut brown. So blending through some of this walnut brown, just to really kind of darken up that right hand side, using a bit more of the raw umber to add a bit more of a yellowy orange glow on the right, and through this lighter patch here as well. So as we darken up other areas, we need to just come back to our darker areas and just redefine them a little bit more. Just a little bit more shading with the walnut brown, and just starting to add a tiny little bit of texture as well, just making some really kind of dot-like fur lines. I'm going to add a tiny little bit of the dark sepia to the centre here where we do have the darker areas. I'm going to add a tiny little bit of the red violet onto the left hand side here, in between some of these areas here, just a little bit of like a purpley red shadow tone. So on the muzzle area here, we're just going to add in a layer of the dark Naples ochre. We've already got a little bit of a layer down of the raw umber. This is just going to increase that sort of yellow tone. Let's blend it lightly into the whiter area just around the nose. And you can see we've got the same kind of blue tone going on down the bottom by the mouth here. So we're just going to add in some of the sky blue. Just shade it down. And around the nose as well. And we're going to go on top of that with some of the dark sepia, blend it through. So you're going to work from the darker areas and back into the creamy sort of blue area here. We're using really tiny little strokes of the pencil to just add a tiny little bit of texture and detail to this area, and just to help blend this mouth area out a little bit as well. And around the nose as well, we're just going to do exactly the same, just bring little tiny dots and strokes from the darker area of the nose and the mouth into some of this lighter fur surrounding it. So really tiny lines incredibly softly you want to go in with your pencils. Just going to continue some of this shading down from the top half of the face, just using some nougat just to create a little bit of contour around the nose. And the first little whisker section we're just going to shade with the nougat as well, come right into the nose. Just go over a couple times and get a little bit darker there. And we're going to take the walnut brown and just bring this darker edge all the way down. I'm going to use a fairly hard pressure to add that in. And then we can use the walnut brown, just softly map out some of the little whisker indentations, the really dark sort of spots where the whiskers sprout out from. We're just going to add some of those in. Just really softly, and just to blend them in, just going to lift the pressure off your pencil even more. I'm also just going to go around that with some of the raw umber as well. So to create the whiskers further down, they're a little bit lighter, so we're just going to go in with the nougat. So we're just going to create like little tiny circles really close to each other, just to represent where these whiskers sort of pop out from. Again, just going into the lighter areas, lifting the pressure off the pencil and just blending it in a little bit. And the next one down, exactly the same thing. And then the last one. So we come down to the edge of the mouth where we just need to get a little bit darker down here. A little bit of shadow where the whiskers are sort of crowding over, and you just have the sort of shadow from the mane, and this is where a lot of the light isn't really hitting the lion, so we're just going to add a little bit of shading with the nougat down here and just again blend it out into the surrounding area. I'm going to go into these whiter areas now with the sky blue. Really add a sort of blue tone in there, which is absolutely perfect. And we can add a little bit of an orange tone with some of the terracotta as well. There we go. So now that we've added this section here, we can see that the top of the nose needs to get a little bit darker. So we're just going to add in even more sky blue, just really bringing it up. So using a heavier pressure on the pencil, and then we're going to go in with the walnut brown to find the top edge of the nose because that's really dark. But we're just going to use I'm going to give my walnut brown a sharpen actually, so I've got a nice sharp point to work with. But we're just going to bring some tiny little fur lines from the dark nose and into the top of the nose there. Just really defining the sort of shape at the top of the nose there. And then just bringing some fur lines and some shading into this area. We could even go in and just use a slightly different darker tone of blue as well, so if you feel like you need some different blue, use like a dark indigo or something. I'm just going to use a tiny little hint of some dark indigo to really darken that up, like so. I'm just going to add a tiny little hint of dark indigo around the nose as well. Okay, so then we can just fill in the right hand side here. So what we're going to do is just exactly the same thing. We're going to add the base layer down using ivory or cream, just a really nice light base colour. Now this part of the face sort of blends into the mane a little bit, so you've got a little bit of a tuft of fur here, which is where the sort of mane starts. So we're just going to kind of go around that area for the time being. We're just going to add in the base layer. Okay, so with this bit we're just going to do exactly the same thing. We're just going to define some of the darker areas with the raw umber. There's not too many darker sections on this side of the face, it's just pretty much shading. We don't have to do the top of the nose because we've already done that, so this is going to be fairly straightforward. We're just going to shade in pretty much this section between the eye and the nose here with this, so we're just following the fur direction. We just want to use a light pressure as well. On this side, because there is a lot more light sort of catching the lion, we're going to do a little bit of blending with some light flesh, just a little bit of a peachy tone, just to give it a nice light sort of luminescent effect almost. So I'm just going to work a couple of layers on this. I'm just going to lightly shade and blend into the surrounding areas. So like we did for the left hand side, I'm just going to lightly go in with the raw umber. So really lightly. Just gently shading this in. And just underneath the eye as well. I'm just going to blend a little bit with some of the light flesh. Then we're going to use some of the burnt sienna just to shade this section, just around by the eye a little bit. So just coming from this darker section, just using a little bit of a harder pressure around there, and then just lifting the pressure and following the direction of the fur as we're coming to shading the rest of it. I just need to bring it down a little bit further as well. So just really lightly shading as we come down. Going in with a little bit of the nougat, just going in with a bit of a harder pressure around this line which comes down the side of the nose. Blending it out, lifting the pressure as we come into the other areas, or that lighter section. We're going to add some of the dark chrome yellow to this section as well, just really lightly sort of glaze this over. And we're going to come into the band which comes down here with some of the light cadmium red as well, just gently shade some of that over. I'm going to blend it with some of the light flesh. And going back in with some of the burnt sienna and just adding a little bit of detail. So adding in a few fur lines. And we're just going to bring in some of the walnut brown. Continue some of that texture, a little bit of that sort of flecked sort of texture with the darker fur. So I'm also just bringing down some of these other shadows from the eye here, just using the walnut brown. Just increasing the shading just by increasing the pressure in some areas. And we're going to add a tiny little bit of the chrome yellow to the very right hand side of the eye here for a lighter section. I'm going to go back in with the raw umber, add some fur lines coming down from the darker section of the eye and just bringing it all the way through the fur down here. Going to do the same with the nougat. I'm going to use some of the dark sepia just to really add in some of the darker lines through here. I'm also going to use some of the burnt sienna as well. And for a slightly darker tone, the more we come down here, I'm just going to lightly shade in some of the nougat. For a slightly cooler tone down here. And just strengthen the shading up the top here with some of the dark chrome yellow. And using some of the burnt sienna just to add in some little flecks of sort of gingery goodness. Like so. So then we just need to continue this kind of tone around the nose here. So we're going to use some of the dark chrome yellow just to add a little bit of shading down the side. through the nose here as well, just to give this again a little bit more of a lighter glow. So all the way down to the edge of the mouth. And then we're going to use the sky blue to shade around the nose. So coming all around the nose and just adding the sky blue from the darker area and bringing it into the lighter area. Now on top of that I'm going to use some of the dark sepia, but I'm going to use this coming from the darker area into the lighter area once more, just make some tiny little lines. Just going to use some of the burnt sienna and add some shading just around this line which sort of comes down here. Add in some fair lines as we come. We just sort of graduate this section, this small section here, we just want to graduate it down and out a little bit more. I'm just going to darken up the top here as well. I'm going to use some of that dark indigo and just shade around the left hand or right hand eye and the left hand eye so it evens it out. And I'm just going to shade some of this around the edge of the mouth down here as well. I'm going to add even more shading around the mouth with some of the nougat, just going over that sort of indigo blue section and around the very bottom of the mouth here, just adding in a little bit of shading as well. I'm going to use some of the red violet to add a little bit of fur lines to this section here. So you can see that this section, this side kind of glows a lot more than this side. Now we're going to blend out this yellow section a little bit more, so we're going to just use some of the raw umber. I'm just going to bring the raw umber right into the nose here. And we're just going to use the nougat to just continue adding our shading. So I'm just going to add in some tiny little details, just using the point of the pencil on the nougat. I'm going to start to add in these little whisker dots as well. So we're just going to finally place these, just using a little dot of the nougat. And I'm just going to shade them in, just by lifting the pressure and using like a little bit of a circular motion just to blend those through to the rest of the fur. So we're just creating the form of the nose. So around the nostrils you want a lighter, like a halo, and then we're just adding some shading around that so it looks like the nose is coming forward. So we just want to work on some of this shading on the top of the nose as well, especially on the left hand side where things tend to be a lot darker. And we're just going to continue adding in some of these little whisker areas. So I'm just going to add in, so we've got 3 more rows to add in. So I'm just going to gently start adding in the second row, just using a light pressure on the pencil, on the nougat. And blending that through just by gently shading. And the next one just coming a little bit further down, adding in a little bit more shading more towards the nose. This one's got a little bit more shading. I'm just using a little bit of a fur line as well just to blend that through. And again, just blending that into the surrounding areas just by using a light shading. And then the final one just down here. It's quite a small one just off to the side. But again, just shading into the surrounding area so we sort of blend it through. And then we can just add a little bit more shading on the bottom of the mouth here. So I'm just going through with the dark chrome yellow. And then we're just going to use the nougat just to add a little bit of texture. Through this sort of lighter section, we're going to add even more shading just by gently layering down some dark indigo. And then going through with some of the dark sepia, adding down some fur lines just to add some more texture and more shading around the nose. So now that we have sort of darkened everywhere up around the nose, we need to go in and just darken the nose itself. So using a hard pressure, just really darkening up this nose. Really darkening it up. Like so. Okay, so we've pretty much added in all of the necessary things that we need to add into the face. We just need to refine a few areas, so just going through and just adding a little bit more detail. That's what I'm just going to spend a little minute doing now. So the next thing we're going to be working on is the mane. So the sort of main piece of this is the nice flowy, fluffy texture of the mane itself. So that's what we're going to be adding. So we're going to be working on the left hand side, so all of this bit around here. We're also going to be adding in the chin as well, but we're going to be working on the left hand side of the mane first. I'm actually going to just add in the chin section now. So this part of the line, I'm actually going to go in and use a warm grey 1 as a base. I'm just going to lift the graphite at the bottom ends of the chin fur first, and then we're just going to shade down some warm grey 1, just spanning and sort of spiralling out from the centre of the mouth here. So coming around like so, and then we're just going to bring some fur lines just coming off the edge of the chin. Like so, and then we can just work on darkening. So to darken, first of all, we're just going to use the dark sepia, and we're just going to bring some dark sepia lines from the mouth section here. Just going to bring some of those down, really sort of taper it into the rest of this fur down here. So we need a nice sharp pencil, so I'm going to give this a quick resharpen. We're just going to be using the walnut brown for this as well. So I'm going to be using the dark sepia. I want a nice sharp pencil. We're just going to create fur lines just coming off from this central section, and we're just going to follow the direction of the fur. And this is quite a long sort of fur on the chin as well, so we can just elongate our fur stroke a little bit. So I'm just bringing down some of this and just faintly just sort of tapering it out into the lighter fur, so really sort of separating the fur lines, really spacing them apart so we get this nice sort of tapered out effect. I'm going to use the walnut brown just to help to add a little bit of variation in tone. So we're just going to use some of the walnut brown just to bring some really faint fur strokes through this section. And we're going to use some of the dark indigo just to shade into the mouth, the top of the mouth, and we're just going to gently bring some of this dark indigo through the fur on the chin. So really gently shading. Then we're going to use the warm grey 1 once more, and we're just going to increase the pressure and add some really kind of long fur lines into this. Then we're going to switch to using a little bit of the nougat. So using a little bit of nougat, I'm going to do exactly the same thing, just start to add some darker sections of the fur in the mouth. So just identify where you have a little bit more of a shadow, and that's where we're going to be adding this. And then we're going to go in and use a little bit of the Warm Grey 3 as well, and again just using a harder pressure on the pencil and identifying where you have some of the darker sort of clumps of the fur on the chin. Now a lot of this will become a lot more sort of distinguishable when we start to add in all of the main fur around the outer edge. I'm also just going to go through here with some of the dark burnt sienna, just for a little bit of a warmer tone, and then just switching back to the nougat and the Warm Grey 3, just adding in some darker tones, especially on the left hand side where the face is in a bit more shadow. I want to add a few more cooler tones, so just concentrating more of the grey onto the left hand side there. Just using a much harder tone as well. And then just switching back to using some of the dark indigo, just adding in a few fur strokes, and also just switching back to the dark sepia as well, just coming back from the mouth and bringing a few of those lines and that fur texture through. And just going through with a tiny little bit of shading with the raw umber, so give it a bit more of a creamy feel. I also just want to make sure that we have the mouth section prominent. Just really darkening up that central section there, so just going in with a really hard pressure on the dark sepia, just to really get that bit dark in there. And again, just blending that out with some fur lines there. Okay, so now that we've done that bit, then we can work on the mane. I really hope that you guys have enjoyed working along with me in real time on this first tutorial part. If you want to continue following along with me with the other two tutorial parts, then you can find them on Patreon and on my website. I'll leave the links to both of those in the description if you want to continue the process with this with me. But you don't have to sign up to Patreon or the website. You can just complete the lion using the techniques and everything that you've learnt in this tutorial. You've got the colours, you've got the reference, you've got the black and white reference, you've got everything that you need to complete this lion without those tutorial parts. But if you want the security and the guidance of the tutorials, then they're available on those two platforms. As I said, make sure that you tag me in your works in progress and your completed pieces on Instagram and join the Facebook group as well. It's a really good Facebook group. There's loads of lovely people giving advice. You can post your art, you can post art questions, you can share anything that you want art related. I'll leave the link to that in the description. But that is pretty much it for today's video, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below of what part or what technique you particularly enjoyed when following this tutorial, or what you found difficult when following this tutorial. If you're new here and you like this real-time content, then make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you receive more videos like this and other art related content every single week straight to your inbox. And make sure you tick that bell as well so you're notified as soon as I upload. I will catch you guys next week. Bye!